Good evening and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And tonight, as we often do, we'll be talking about public policy issues. Our guest tonight is Jay Young. Jay is the Executive Director of Common Cause Illinois. Jay,
Yes,
welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start with the basics.
Sure.
What is Common Cause and why is Common Cause?
Sure. So Common Cause actually started, next year it'll be 50 years old. It was started by a Republican named John Gardner, who was appalled at what he was seeing in the Nixon White House. And
A Republican who was appalled by another Republican in the White House.
Indeed. And sort of as he was thinking about sort of what the response should be, he realized that it seemed that everybody was organized except the people. So 50 years ago, there really weren't as many democracy organizations out there doing the sort of work that you see today, flashing across your social media feeds. And so Common Cause was started with really a national agenda, really focused on integrity. And, you know, our motto is holding power accountable. And that was really where they began. Over the years, they expanded their agenda to include things like Vietnam and that sort of thing. Today, we went from about 4,000 members nationally back 50 years ago. Today, we're up to about 1.2 million nationwide.
Wow, that's impressive.
Operations on the ground in about 30 states, but members in all 50 states. Here in Illinois, we've got about 40,000 members. And we work on a range of issues, ranging from campaign finance reform to voting rights to media consolidation.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the Nixon administration because that, I go back far enough to remember those days. And, you know, we talk about things that are going wrong today and there's corruption at local or at the national level. And we forget that in the Nixon administration, many of his top officials went to jail.
Right.
I mean, this was Watergate was a huge deal. Not only did Nixon step down, but all these, major people, his chief of staff, several others, were imprisoned as a result of this.
Right.
Vice president was implicated. I mean, it was just a massive scandal. And so we as a country recovered from that.
Right.
And had some very good years subsequent to that. And outgrowth of things like the Church Commission, Senator Church, who investigated all the abuses of power, and Common Cause. These are outgrowths of these things. So is it your feeling, you can tell it's mine, that out of crises grow opportunities, and Common Cause might not have existed had Watergate not happened?
Indeed.
And so do we see that opportunity today to see new things flourish in an era where people are threatened with being fired for reporting the weather accurately?
Right. Right. So I do think that there is that there are some good things that are going to come from this. For example, we're much more as a populace. We're much more civically engaged generally. We think we know. We pay attention to things. I spend a lot of time, for example, talking about the census, and I don't recall sort of the popular conversation being so focused on a survey that takes place every 10 years. Now, granted, the concerns that we have right now are life and death kind of issues, and it's really good that people are thinking about these issues because there's a lot of work to do to defend our democracy. But the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of groups out there. There's a lot of people who are responding to what they're seeing in the news, and they feel compelled to get out in the streets and to march or to run for office. Hopefully that is a trend that we'll see sort of move forward. Now, there's a lot of bad stuff, obviously.
There is, but I think that the point I like to come back to with people I talk to who, will sometimes get very depressed or think the sky is falling and we're all doomed. And what I try to respond with is, as I say, with the Watergate and the 60s, where, if you remember, there were leading figures, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, were assassinated, and leading political figures were assassinated. There were riots in the streets. National Guard had to be called out in major cities. The Watergate scandal, as I say, major people went to jail. So it's to focus on the things that can be done, and the idea that yes, we can respond to these things, and it may be dire. And it's not. There's a difference between that and being kind of Pollyanna-ish, like, oh, everything will work out. No, everything won't work out, but everything can work out if enough people get involved to make it work out.
Sure.
Right? Is that kind of what Common Cause is trying to do? Is help that process along?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we are we're a nonpartisan organization, you know, and because we operate nationally, we have the opportunity to get folks on both sides of the aisle upset with us as we're trying to hold them accountable. So, you know, you can talk about, for example, an issue like gerrymandering, where, you know, in a state like Illinois, where the Democrats control all the reins of power, you know, gerrymandering is referred to as a, you know, Republican plot to steal power away, but you take it to a different state like, I don't know, Maryland or something like that, and it's the other side. You hear the opposite side of the argument. So, you know, there is opportunity, I think, for an organization like Common Cause to provide a more sober perspective on
balanced,
things. A balanced perspective, and we can say, look, we've seen it before. You know, what we're seeing around something like automatic voter registration in Illinois, we've done it before because we helped pass it in Oregon. And I was just out in New York trying to help them get something started. So, you know, there's value to being part of a national organization.
So speaking of national issues, you mentioned the census earlier.
Sure.
And yeah, that's a major issue. And we were talking just before the show about a couple of major technology companies, Apple with their Siri product and Amazon with Alexa, you know, these home speakers, and how the government is trying to work with those companies to make sure that those smart speakers aren't being used for disinformation purposes. Right. And so one of the fears, as you know, I spent a lot of time working with elections and protecting election integrity, and you know, the misinformation is, if anything, I think the bigger threat than even people hacking in. And so is Common Cause involved in that approach or that area of the census, trying to make sure people understand what the real facts are?
Absolutely. In fact, these days I spend about 70% of my time actually preparing for the census, and I've been doing it for the last 22 months, working just in preparation for the 2020 census. And really what we've been trying to do from the outset, and it's not just Common Cause, there are a number of our partners that are working on this statewide here in the state, in Illinois, is to not just create a pool of resources, money. Illinois has appropriated more money for census outreach.
Well, I just read the governor appropriated or signed a bill for, what, 29 million, I think?
So it's a total of, we actually got $1.5 million last year, so it's a total of $30.5 million, which is more per capita than any other state in the country. But we also have a lot to lose. Here in Illinois, we've got, and I know you asked about the technology issue, but I just wanted to make sure that people are aware of the fact that we've lost a congressional seat every decade since the 30s. And there's some models out there that suggest that, well, we're going to lose one, we might lose two this time around. Illinois just isn't growing as fast as some of the other states, with a lot of population shift, folks leaving, a lot of folks, particularly on the south and west sides of Chicago, leaving, either moving south or moving out of the state altogether. And so we're going to lose representation. We need to count every single person that we can afford. Getting back to the information question, we know, all the data tells us that the best way to ensure that folks make a plan to get themselves counted is to learn about these issues from the voices that they trust. Right now, we struggle in this country. We don't trust our institutions anymore. We don't trust the media. We don't trust the church. We don't trust the schools. We don't trust our government sometimes.
We don't even trust the Supreme Court anymore.
Indeed, indeed. You know who you trust? You trust the person who cuts your hair. you trust the bus driver who takes your kid to school.
Yeah.
You might trust the ethnic media that talks about the issues that you care about. And so what we've been at Common Cause here in Illinois, around the country, what we've been trying to do is make sure that those trusted voices have the resources that they need, the right information that they can share with folks to avoid these kind of misinformation problems.
And how do you do that? I mean, so how do you reach the barbers? How do you reach the pastors? How do you reach the bus drivers? I mean, how do you get to those groups of people?
So you have to, there's a couple of different ways, I guess, that you can think about it. You start by going to where people sort of congregate. So as we were thinking about building out a statewide coalition of census advocates, we made sure the libraries were on board. Because particularly when you get outside of the Chicago metropolitan area, where maybe broadband access isn't as accessible, people go to the library and you trust your librarian. I know, for example, before I did this job, I used to be in the early childhood space, and when I wanted to reach folks to make sure that they were getting well child visits for their children, but they lived in rural Illinois, I'd find the company that provided the church vans that would pick people up and take. And so you have to be creative. But you have to also start from a place of talking to the experts in a particular community. They're hard to count communities in every corner of the state. The largest one is children under the age of 5. We have babies everywhere.
Yeah, but they count.
They count. If you are present on Census Day, you count.
If you're alive that day, you're a person here.
Absolutely. And so where you might want to go is let's reach out to the folks who are training the child care workers. Let's make sure that they're on board. The elderly, that's another community. Make sure that the Census Bureau actually predicts that the single most powerful predictor of somebody who's maybe not going to fill out the census form is they rent. The number 2 is female-headed households. Number 3 is younger folks. And so when you're building out a local census coalition, you want to make sure that you've got housing advocates on board. You want to make sure that you are, just responding to all those issues and trying to predict where folks go.
So how does Common Cause get these influencers who you're trying to reach? How do you get them to trust you and trust Common Cause as a valid source of information?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that I can start from is I can say, it's my job just to get you the resources, and then I'm backing away. I will put together a slide deck for you, and you can put your name on it, do whatever you want. I will go down to Springfield and I will raise a pool of money. My organization doesn't take any government money. So this isn't money from me. I wish I could apply for it. It would make my life a lot easier as I'm working on grant reports right now. But you have to make sure that, one, you let people know that you understand and respect the fact that they're an expert in their own communities. I'm not going to tell you how to reinvent the wheel. You already know how to reach families. 2, I have access to all sorts of information, whether it's you need one-pagers, I got those. You need basic facts, I got those. You need to have somebody come out to your community, maybe bring along an elected official with them. I can do that for you as well. And I make sure that you're front and center. If we want to, if you're, there's particular language concerns in your community, I could connect you with those kind of partners. And so really it is about building trust by making people aware of the fact that I'm already funded to do this work. I can do that work for you. You don't have to chase any money. But if you need money, I can help you fill out your
because there's money available from the state.
Indeed, actually.
But you guys, when we talked about that 30 million, that doesn't help Common Cause.
That doesn't help Common Cause.
Indirectly it does because it helps the people you're trying to help. But
Indeed.
None of that money actually comes to your organization.
No.
So how do you guys get funded?
So we rely a lot on the generosity of
others.
We are a 501c3. A lot of the work that I do, particularly the systemic kind of issues, the voting rights issues, and that sort of thing, that tends to be funded by grants from private philanthropy. But I'm also,
dialing for dollars, right?
When needed, it is. But I also, I will admit that my life is probably a little bit easier than some of my counterparts at other nonprofits because again, I do have a national.
Sure, and a national name.
Exactly.
Right, and I would think that the fact that you're not government funded helps in the credibility, like because you can show that you're nonpartisan, like you're not getting money from the political parties, you're not getting money from the elected officials.
Sure.
So you're not pushing any official government agenda, you're just doing what you guys think is the right thing to do. and you're privately funded, so you're not influenced by that.
Indeed, and on top of all that, I had a life before this. I did something completely different, and so I haven't come into this work with baggage of relationships, and I'm entirely comfortable with walking up and asking the dumb question: why do we do it that way? Again, like why does it seem like these things only are going to benefit your organization or the I care about Inglewood as much as I care about Cahokia. I care about constituencies not just around the state. I have members all across the state, but the thing that is most important, and I think the thing that it sometimes upsets some of the elected officials that I care about, is that I am perfectly willing to let them know, like, look, I'm going to be your friend on these other issues, but where you're gonna sort of
Take a different stance than what we're looking for.
Then I'm happy to call you on that. That's my job, and I don't have no desire to ever run for office, and so it's not like
You're not burning those bridges.
I'm
right?
not worried about that at all.
Yeah. But you mentioned around the state, and being here in the Chicago area, we've become very Chicago-centric. We think we're the center of the state universe, but particularly in something like a census, where this outreach has to be statewide. Do you find any resistance because is Common Cause seen as a Chicago organization?
Yeah.
And hey, what are you coming downstate? You guys are those crazy guys up in the big city. Is that part of what you wrestle with?
It is, and I mean it's something that is challenging, not just for my organization or on this particular issue. Illinois is a very large state, and we are very diverse.
Yes, economically,
demographically, and so that's an issue that I've dealt with in a number of different contexts. And again, the only thing that I guess my only real response to that really is, if you don't know me, I don't expect that you're going to automatically trust me. Let me do something for you first to show, and again, it's let me get you some resources so you don't have to worry about it. Let me help connect you with somebody that you may or may not be already meeting with in your community, who can maybe give you a local perspective on this. And maybe again, it's back to those trusted voices. So, for example, one of the first organizations we reached out to was the Farm Bureau.
Sure.
They have a reach that's much broader than ours. The libraries, again, library associations, wherever, all over the state. That's kind of a anchor.
Well, particularly in Illinois, here we in Chicago tend to forget that we are largely a farm state.
Indeed.
And the Farm Bureau would have the ability to reach all those people who are not, in fact, connected to Chicago or indirectly connected.
Right. Right.
So switching gears a little bit,
Sure.
The census certainly is one thing that Common Cause is thankfully spending a lot of time trying to work on. And there are other issues. Voter integrity, of course, is a big issue these days, not just in terms of security or cybersecurity, voter registration databases getting hacked or that sort of thing, but in terms of misinformation, other voter suppression tactics that are used in various places. So what is the basic position of Common Cause, and how do you try to work on issues related to voter integrity?
Sure.
Or voting integrity?
Sure. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we believe that our democracy works better when everyone participates. But to get to that point, there's a few things, levers that I guess you have to sort of focus on. You need to eliminate as many barriers as you can. I mentioned the word automatic voter registration.
You can explain what that is. I know, but
sure,
our audience doesn't.
Sure. So there are usually the way that people go to get themselves registered to vote, the sort of standard practice here in Illinois. This is one thing I struggle with. I grew up on the East Coast. We called them DMVs.
People do use that. The Department of Motor Vehicles, the Secretary of State.
Secretary of State's office.
But yeah, here DMV is okay.
Okay. Well,
people do know what that is.
And so that's usually the approach. But in order to get yourself registered, there are a couple. You actually had to take a number of affirmative steps. You have to say, one, you got to get there. Two, You have to sort of be willing to stand in an additional line, perhaps, wait some, but you actually have to say the words,
I want to register.
I want to register to vote. And what the social scientists will tell you is that if you switch that dynamic up just a little bit, and instead of forcing somebody to say, I want to register to vote.
Or even ask them, would you like to register?
Exactly. It makes all the difference. Actually, what are the data that, as we were sort of pushing for the AVR to automatic voter registration to come to Illinois, we were really talking about that this was one change that would not only use good data that the government already had, citizenship data, voter registration citizenship data that they already had. It would save the state money because we move away from sort of costly paper, which is ripe for error. But we would also bring upwards of 1 million people, new voters, onto the rolls over time.
Just in Illinois, we're talking about.
And this is just in Illinois. They're already doing this elsewhere around the country. Illinois was the 10th state to adopt automatic voter registration. Governor Rauner was the first Republican governor to sign it into law. And actually, it had massive bipartisan support. Every single legislator that voted on it voted in favor of automatic voter registration. We didn't lose a single vote. And so
that's remarkable. I mean, just in any in any political context, but particularly today,
indeed,
where Republicans and Democrats seem to be from different planets, to get that kind of bipartisan support is significant.
And one of the things I knew that I knew that we had won when one of the things that makes Illinois a little bit different is that we're actually not just helping to register folks at the DMV, but we're also trying to the goal would be anytime you come in contact with the government, somebody is also trying to ask you, hey, would you like to register to vote? And so we added social service agencies. And when the governor, we originally, named agencies like Department of Aging or, the Medicaid agency. But when the governor said, well, what about natural resources? So could we register people to vote when they get their hunting license?
Yeah.
Or how about professional regulations when you get a business license? Like when the governor's team raised those, I knew that we had the victory. Because it meant that he agreed with us that that this was a platform that really could work and really could bring new folks into the system.
And I think what we were talking about earlier, the shift in thinking between, I'm not going to ask you to opt in, I'm going to automatically opt you in. If you want to decline, you can.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that psychological shift usually results in far more participation.
Right.
That's why advertisers want you to, when you're online and you're collecting all your information, they just automatically do it. But before we leave the subject of voter registration, so registering is one thing, turnout is another.
Indeed.
So you can register all the people you want, but if they don't come out to vote, then it's futile. So does Common Cause spend time, effort, thought on trying to increase voter participation?
We do. I mean, again, as I said, it's a thing that I said before, our democracy works better when everybody participates, and that's part of participating. Registration is just the first step. Actually getting somebody into a polling place and getting them knowledgeable enough about what they need to do is there. And so we're not only supporting sort of civic education. There were a couple interesting things that happened just last session. The governor just signed into law over this past summer, including civics in schools, in middle schools. Big deal, because it wasn't required before. There was adding civics opportunities inside for returning citizens, for folks who are incarcerated. There is a model that's happening down in Stateville Correctional Facility. It's a peer-led program where guys who've been in the inside for quite some time are teaching some of the guys who are going to be leaving.
Here's how you can reintegrate yourself into society, and one of those things is by voting.
By voting. So there's those sort of options. I do a lot of public speaking. I talk to students, try to get as many people engaged, get them interested and excited. The nice thing is that there is enough that's going on right now that there's always an entry point to get folks engaged. We have a chapter at the University of Chicago, for example. they got really interested in a rent control, the rent control issue. Now, Common Cause is not a housing organization, and so I can't, I want to support you in the issue that you care about, but that's not necessarily our issue. However, I can talk to you about the statutes that actually created the rent control ban and how it actually grew out of a model bill library from a corporate lobby known as ALEC.
I'm familiar with the American Legislative Exchange Council.
Indeed,
Yes,
indeed.
yes.
And so, it's sort of a developer-friendly statute. And so we've actually managed to train a number of our younger members to show up at community events and talk about ALEC and talk about what moved Illinois in that direction. And then step back and let the experts talk about the housing issues. So it is as I think I said earlier in our conversation, in general, we're way more engaged these days. We care a lot.
We as a people.
We as a
American
people. We stare at our phones, we learn, and we think we're experts ourselves.
Yeah. So, in fact, one of the things I was reading about weather, that everyone thinks they're a weather expert now because you can find so many maps and things online, and
Right.
you don't really know
Right.
which ones are good, which ones are recent. So we can be lulled into a false sense of assurance that we know what's going on.
Right.
So I want to come back to the census for a minute too. One of the things that occurred to me when you mentioned, or when I've read about online applications, having a background myself in cybersecurity, I worry about how do we trust the online system?
Yeah. So I think that's a legitimate concern. And honestly, we've been spending so much time dealing with this citizenship question that we haven't had time to really dig into a number of these other areas. And when you ask that question, how can we trust? I can tell you that there are a lot of folks out there, the Census Bureau's own data suggests that this is an issue. So there's a few different answers to that. First off, you don't have to fill out your census online. The Census Bureau was underfunded for most of this past decade, and there were policy reasons why it's cheaper to get folks to respond to the census online. And so 80% of American households are going to be encouraged to do that. But if you're not comfortable, you'll still be able to do it the old-fashioned way on paper. This will be the first year, actually, that you can also do it over the telephone in language, about 64 different languages. You'll have the opportunity to respond in that way. So it's about doing it in the way that makes you feel the most comfortable. But the cybersecurity concerns are very, very real. And quite frankly, if you pay attention to some of the national reporting, the Census Bureau really wasn't where they needed to be.
On that note, sadly, we're out of time.
Oh dear.
And it's such an interesting topic. We could go on for another half hour.
Right.
But Jay, I hope you come back. It's been so interesting. So please.
I would love to do so.
Come back as soon as we can get you back, right?
Definitely.
All right.
Definitely.
So thank you for joining us on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. We've been talking with Jay Young of Common Cause, Illinois. You can see us every Saturday night on Comcast Channel 19 at 8 o'clock, or find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So till next time, thank you and good night.